think one of the challenges for people that are becoming the young leaders of the future is understanding, first of all, what authentic leadership is, but also understanding what that means to them and what they can do to bring that to their own organisations. And I think in the first instance, and this sounds quite holistic, but it's about being true to yourself. And I think what that means in a practical terms is understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. And rather than trying to, and look at it through this lens, rather than trying to improve your weaknesses, play to your strengths. And as you're building that team around you, look at people that complement you. So look at people that complement and they cover your weaknesses almost. So actually, as you're building a team and as you're building an organisation, you're a hugely complementary group of people and everybody is playing to their strengths rather than struggling with their individual weaknesses. I think the piece of advice I would give to young female leaders, regardless of whether they're in a male-dominated world or not, is to not be intimidated by what you consider to be the current and traditional hierarchy of the corporate ladder and of how you think you need to be and what you think you need to do to get on in that. I think one of the things that you have to do is almost bring your bigger self to work. So it's almost an amplified version of yourself, because that also, certainly from a confidence point of view and a believing in yourself point of view, often, and especially women, tend to underplay themselves. So by bringing yourself to work in that mindset of this is my bigger self, this is my amplified self, the reality of that is not necessarily always going to be true, but by framing it in that mindset, I think you automatically put yourself in that view of how you're going to interact. I think there are three fascinating trends that are really, in fact, I don't even think they're on the horizon for business. I think they're here. And I think the real challenge for business leaders is to not only recognise that they're here, but to see how they can implement them in their own organisation. And I think, firstly, the two big trends that are here are globalisation and technology. So if you look at the traditional business environment, we haven't changed the way we work in over a quarter of a century, yet in that same quarter of a century, absolutely everything else in our life has changed. The way we influence, the way we communicate, the way we think about work. And the key driver behind that has been globalisation and technology. And I think the interesting thing about that is that those two trends have given rise to a third trend. And that third trend is what we're seeing evolve very quickly, and that is the erosion of the traditional hierarchical command and control, male-dominated power structure. And what we're seeing emerge in that void is a new type of power, and it's a much more feminine power. And so I think those three trends of globalization, technology, and feminine power are revolutionizing the way that we're working. I think authentic leadership is knowing who you are and actually being prepared to be very open about that in not just the office environment, but in the way that you work. So knowing what your values are, so what the key values are that determine not only who you are as a person, but what your views are in terms of how the world of work should be. And once you understand those, it's being very clear to the people that you work with that these are the values in which you are basing your business, in which you are growing your business. I think the financial sector is fascinating, and for me it has been a huge intellectual challenge, and I think regardless, I have met some of the smartest people I have ever worked with, and actually I had to bring my A game to work every day, because when you're surrounded, regardless of gender, when you're surrounded by driven, brilliant, motivated people, and you don't just find these people in financial services, you find them in all sorts of organisations. But I think when you're surrounded by people like that have a mindset of work hard, then that makes you raise your own game. And so I think certainly in terms of making me understand what it was like to excel at something and what you needed to put in to get to that place, I think it's an excellent training ground for what you do after that.